Today we're going to be looking at the Chapter 8 review. There's 20 questions on this review. We're going to go through each one, and the test for Chapter 8 is also very similar. So make sure you take detailed notes, and hopefully most of these are not new and you've had good practice with them. All right, so question number 1. It says to solve this for n. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I need to have everything have a common denominator, especially on this side right here, because I want to be able to add them. Now you'll notice that this is n is just like n over 1, right? So I'm going to rewrite it, and I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by the n minus 3 number. So I'm going to start it up here. I'm going to say n over n minus 3 plus, I already have n on top, times n minus 3, and also n minus 3 on the bottom, is equal to 7n minus 18 over n minus 3. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute. So n times n is n squared, minus 3 times n is 3n. And notice I can combine them because they're both over the same thing, is equal to 7n minus 18 over n minus 3. Now the next thing I can do is I can say, well, I'm going to multiply both sides by n minus 3. And you might not see this, or maybe you do, is that they're both over n minus 3. So they cancel out. And I get n squared, n and minus 3n would be minus 2n, is equal to 7n minus 18. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get this side equal to 0. And I do that by adding 18 to both sides and subtracting 7n from both sides. And so what I end up getting is I get n squared minus 9n plus 18 equals 0. So there's two values of n here that are going to make this equal to 0. And the way I solve it is two different ways. I can either factor, which would be figuring out the two things that multiply to 18 and add up to negative 9, or I can use the quadratic formula. Remember quadratic formula, I need to know what a, b, and c are, right? So a in our case is going to be 1, right? B is going to be negative 9, and c is going to be positive 18. And the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I just substitute my values of a, b, and c in. So negative 9 is just going to be 9 plus or minus 81 minus 4 times 1 times 18 all over 2 times 1, which is 2. And I'm not exactly sure what this is, so I can go use my technology. Go to Desmos. And so it's going to be 9. I'll do plus square root of 81 minus 4 times 1 times 18. And I end up getting 12. And then I take that, or actually I can just do this, and then do divided by 2. So it'd be 6. Or, if I do subtraction, it's 3. So my two answers for x are going to be x equals 6 and x equals 3. And so my answer then would be C, which I guess got kind of jumbled up, but that's okay. Okay? Now, number 2. Okay, number 2 says to simplify the expression. Okay, so what we're going to do, you'll notice that this is a division problem. And so how we solve division problems is we start by rewriting. So m plus 2f over 6. And I multiply by the reciprocal. So instead of 10 being on the bottom, it's now on the top. And m squared minus 4f squared, it might not be come to your mind right away. But that's actually a difference of squares because m is squared and 4f squared is a squared. So I can write that as m plus 2f and m minus 2f. And if you want to verify that when you FOIL those out, that this becomes this, you can. And it does. So m plus 2f are going to cancel because we're cross-canceling. And we can also say that 6 and 10 both have a factor of 2, which would be 3 and 5. And so my answer, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply across. So This is a 1, so 1 times 5 would be 5 on top. And 3 times m minus 2f. And so the correct answer to this one would be A. Okay. Number 3. It says, an appliance store manager noted that the weekly sales varied directly, so direct variation, with the amount of money spent on advertising. If last week's sales were $10,000 and $2,000 was spent on advertising, what should be sales be during a week when $1,200 is spent on advertising? So, I said earlier in the chapter that whenever we start talking about variation problems, we always want to have those at hand. So direct variation, I'll write it out. Okay. Direct variation is this: y equals k times x, where k is some unknown. Now it said that if last week's sales were 10,000, so sales is obviously going to be what it is, and 2,000 was spent on advertising, that's my x. Okay, so we're going to say 10,000 is equal to k times 2,000. What should be sales when during a week in which 1,200 was spent on advertising? So that's going to be my new x that I know. So I divide by 2,000 and divide by 2,000. Okay, easy way to do that. Cancel out the zeros, right? And so 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5 is equal to k. So that means if I go back to my original problem, I now have y is equal to 5 times x, where x is how much is spent on advertising. So if I want to figure out how much is spent, I pick 1,200 and put it in for x. And I say y is equal to 1,200 times 5, or 5 times 1,200. Okay? Now, if you didn't know that off the top of your head, that's fine. We go to Desmos, and we say 5 times 1,200 is going to be 6,000. So our correct answer is B. Okay? Now, let's go back to number 4 and get rid of some of this writing. Okay? Number 4. It says that y varies inversely as x, and y is 5 when x is 5. So find y when x is 45. Okay? So, inverse variation. So inverse is going to look like this. X times y equals k. All right? So, first they say when y is 5, x is 5. Or when x is 5, y is 5, right? So if I know both of those, I'm going to say 5 times 5 equals 25. So I know that k is going to be 25. Now it says find y when x is 45. Okay, so we know it's equal to 25. So what we're going to do is we're going to say 45 times y is going to equal 25, because we're taking this formula right here, substituting in 25 for for k, and 45 in for x. So I divide by 45, and I'd say y is going to be equal to, divide both by 5, I'd get 5 over 9, which the answer would be C. Number 5. It says, determine the value for x for any point of discontinuity in the graph, which means what values of x on the bottom make it equal to 0. So we say x squared plus 5x plus 6. We don't want it equal to 0. And so again, you can use the quadratic formula, but for me, I think it's easier if we just factor. We have to also practice on factoring. And so we say the two numbers that multiply to 6 and add up to 5 are going to be 3 and 2, right? So x plus 2 and x plus 3 should not equal 0. And so we'd say x plus 2 should not equal 0, which means x should not equal negative 2. And x plus 3 should not equal 0, which means x should not equal negative 3. So if we look back at our solutions, C is the correct answer. It's written kind of goofy, but that actually does say x cannot be when x is negative 2. I guess ours is written different, but basically it's saying the values of x that give the bottom 0 are going to be negative 2 and negative 3. Okay. Number 6. The distance a car can travel on a certain number or certain amount of fuel varies inversely with its speed. If a car traveling 50 miles per hour can travel 336 miles on 10 gallons of fuel, how far could a car travel on 10 gallons of fuel going 60 miles an hour? So we notice that the 10 gallons and 10 gallons are the same, right? So that's almost, it's almost not important, okay? But what is important is this: 50 and 336 and 60 miles per hour and the other distance. Now it says it varies inversely, and we've already looked at inverse problems. It says that x times y equals some k that we don't know, right? So let's look at the problem we do know. 50 times 336 equals k. And so I go to Desmos and I say 50 times 336 is going to be 16,800. So I say k is going to equal 16,800. So I go back to my original problem and I'm going to say, okay, my x is going to be 60 now. And I'm going to say 60 times y equals 16,800. Divide by 60, divide by 60, and I find y is equal to 280. Which would be D. Okay. Now, number 7. It says, for what values of x is the expression undefined? Again, that's asking when the bottom is going to be equal to 0. So we'd say 2x squared minus 3x minus 2. We don't want equal to 0, right? Now, there's lots of different ways to do it. And I said before you could use the quadratic formula. So let's do that this time. A, B, and C. A is going to be 2. B is going to be negative 3. And C is going to be negative 2. So, using the quadratic formula, I would say negative 3 is 3 plus or minus square root of 9 minus 4 times 2 times negative 2 all over 2 times 2. Okay, and I'll get these from Desmos by going over here. Okay. Make sure we're doing this right. Oh, negative 2. There we go. So we get 2. And if I change that minus to a plus, or plus to a minus, I get negative 1/2. So my two values are going to be 2 and negative 1/2. So B is the correct answer for this one. Okay? Number 8. Okay? Number 8 says simplify the expression. Now this is an adding. And we go back to our rules for adding and subtracting fractions, right? They have to have the same denominator. Now, you'll notice that this is m squared minus 25, and then I have m minus 5. Well, we know we can change m minus 5 to be m minus 25 by multiplying it by m plus 5. It's a difference of squares. And if I do that to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. And so basically what I get is 30 plus, now I distribute, 3 times m is 3m, plus 3 times 5 is 15, all over m squared minus 25. Okay, so I add my like terms. 30 plus 15 is 45 plus m, 3m, all over m squared minus 25. And so my correct answer would be, well, they wrote it differently, but D is what they got. So it's 3 plus m plus 15. And basically that's just taking this 45 plus 3m and factoring a 3 out. So the m plus 15 over, and then they factored m plus 5 and m minus 5. But it's the same thing as what we had before. Okay? Now, number 9. That says a over 5 is equal to bc. Represents what type of variation? So if you think back to different types of variation we had, if you have all of them in front of you, you know that direct variation, one we've looked at already, is y equals some k times x. So this is not direct variation. There's joint variation, which is when we multiply and add, when we multiply by two different numbers. That's joint variation, so that's not this. Inverse is x times y, so that's not it. So this is combined variation, right? There is joint variation, and that is when this one is. So this is actually B, joint variation. Now, number 10. The sum of a number and 16, its reciprocal, 16 times its reciprocal is 10. Find the number. Okay, so that's kind of a goofy word problem. But it says the sum of a number and 16 times its reciprocal is 10. So the sum of a number, okay, so sum means adding. A number would be, we'll call it x, plus 16 times its reciprocal. So that would be 16 times 1 over x equals 10. Find what the number is, right? So if we wanted to add this, I would have to have an x on the bottom, right? And so to do that, I have to multiply the top by x as well. And so I end up getting x squared over x plus 16 over x equals 10, right? And so what I can do is I can now add and say 16, or x squared plus 16 is just x squared plus 16 over x equals 10. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the 10 on the bottom, or the x on the bottom. So I multiply both sides by x. I cancel out, and I get x squared plus 16 equals 10x. Now you'll notice I can set that equal to 0 by subtracting 10x from both sides. So coming all the way over here, I end up getting x squared minus 10x plus 16 equals 0. And so we'd say the two numbers that multiply to 16 and add up to negative 10, or we could use the quadratic formula, is going to be x minus 8 and x minus 2 equals 0. And so the two values that work in here would be x equals 8 or x equals 2, right? So that would be B, 2 or 8. All right, halfway done. Let's look at number 11. It tells us to simplify the expression, okay? So one of the easiest ways to simplify is actually to break up everything into its factors, because then we can cross-cancel and make it a little bit easier. So we're going to do that first, okay? So I look at the top one, t squared minus 2t minus 3. So that is going to be t. The two numbers that multiply to negative 3 and add up to negative 2 would be negative 3 and t plus 1, okay? Over, now t squared minus 1, that's a difference of squares. So it's going to be t plus 1 and t minus 1, okay? Times, and over here. Now, you'll notice I have 3t minus 3. I'm going to factor a 3 out, and I get t minus 1 here. And the bottom, the two numbers that multiply to 3 and add up to negative 4, are going to be t minus 3 and t minus 1. Okay, so now let's cross cancel. So t plus 1 and t plus 1 are going to cancel on top and bottom. T minus 3 and t minus 3 are going to cross cancel there. T minus 1 and t minus 1 are going to cancel there. And so the only thing I have left is 3 over t minus 1. So the correct answer to this one is going to be D. Okay. Now, coming back up to number 12. All right, 15z equals y represents what type of variation? Now, that is going to be direct variation. Okay, we know that because the direct variation equation is some number times a variable is equal to another variable. We know that's direct variation. Next one, number 13. Find the least common multiple of 7m minus 21 and 14m minus 42. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break these down and factor out what I can. So 7m minus 21, I can factor 7 out. And so it's 7 times 3 minus, m minus 3. And 14m minus 42 is going to be 14 factored out is going to be m minus 3. And so you notice that they both have an m minus 3. So that's good. That means we don't have to add any other factors. Now, what's the least common multiple between 7 and 14? Well, it's actually 14 because I can multiply 7 by 2 and I get the same thing. So the correct answer to this one is D. Okay, 14 times m minus 3. All right, number 14. Y varies jointly as x and z, and y equals 60 when x is 10 and z is negative 3. Find y when x equals 8 and z equals 15. Okay, so y varies jointly, which means it's direct with x and direct with x over z. So we're going to write this, x over y, z equals x, y over z, right? And so what we can do is we can take all the numbers we know in the first one and put in our unknowns in the second one. So the first one, it says y is 60, x is 10. So 10 times 60 over negative 3 is equal to, and then the next one is x is 8, y we don't know, and z is 15, right? So let's simplify if we can. So 10 times 60 divided by negative 3. So let's go to our calculator. So 10 times 60, okay, divided by negative 3. It's going to be negative 200, okay? So we now know that this is negative 200 is equal to positive 8y over 15, right? And so what we can do is we can solve by multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 8 over 15 is 15 over 8. And we'll do the same thing, 15 over 8. And so we go to our calculator and we say, okay, well, what is negative 200 times 15 over 8? The answer is negative 375, which is not a choice. So we must have done something wrong. Okay, well, let's think about it this way. Okay, jointly as x and z. Maybe that means that z must be on top and y must be on bottom. X be on bottom. So we'll rewrite this. Okay, so we're going to say y z over x and y z over x. Let's try this now and see if we get the right answer. Okay, so we'll substitute our values in again. Okay, so we'd say 60 times negative 3 over 10 is equal to don't know y. We know z is 15 and x is 8. Okay, so we'll simplify. So we go to our calculator and we say 60 times negative 3 divided by 10, which is going to be negative 18, right? So this is going to be negative 18 is equal to 15y over 8, okay? Okay, I'll multiply both sides by 8 over 15, multiply by 8 over 15. So negative 18 times 8 over 15. We get negative 9.6, which also is not an answer. What do you think we have to do? Okay, well, I guess there's one more way we could write this, which would be we did x and y together on top over z, and we did y and z on top over x. What if we did this? What if we did x and z over y? So let's try that, x and z over y. Okay, so if I do that, I'll substitute in my values. So x is going to be 10, z is going to be negative 3 over 60. Excuse me, 60. And then over here, x is going to be 8, z is going to be 15, and y is going to be y. We don't know what it is. So we go 10 times negative 3 is negative 30 divided by 6. So this is negative 1/2 is equal to 8 times 15 is going to be 120 over y. And so we can do a little cross multiplying, or we can just say if we know what number would y be to make this negative 1/2, it'd have to be negative 240, which we know then our answer is A. So hopefully you have the equations in front of you. I, of course, don't, which is what made it more difficult. But this right here, okay, this right here is our joint variation equation. And so we want to make note of that so that on our test we can get that one right correct and quickly. All right, number 15. It says determine the equation of any vertical asymptotes of this equation, right? Okay, so first thing we want to look at is we see that the power is bigger on the bottom than on the top. So we know that our y is not going to be just the coefficients divided by each other. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to go graph this. So let's go to decimals. And we go graph. And so our equation is 2x plus 3 divided by, and it was x squared Let's see, how can we do this? squared and plus 2x. And then we had minus 3. Okay, on the bottom. All right, so now you'll see I'm looking for my vertical asymptotes. Okay, so vertical will be up and down. Okay, and so I'll see that I have one right here, which goes through, you'll notice, negative 3. And I have one right here, which goes through 1. So I go back and I say, which one has negative 3 and 1? That would be C. So the vertical asymptotes would be negative 3 and 1 for x. So you can probably guess that on your assignment tomorrow or on your test, it's probably going to be horizontal. So you might want to know what those are. All right, now, number 16 says, which rational function is graphed? Okay, and so what we can do, an easy way to do this, is just to graph them and see which ones you get. So A is x minus 3 over x minus 1. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so x minus 3 over x minus 1. Okay. So x minus 3 over x minus 1 looks like that, which is not our graph, so we know for sure it's not A. Okay, let's go to B, x minus 3 over x plus 1. Okay, looks like that. And again, that's not our graph, so we know it's not B. Now we go to C, 3 over x plus 3 and x minus 1. So we say 3 over okay, and I did x plus 1 and x minus 3. Okay, oh, x plus 3 and minus 1, so it's actually the other way around. Okay, and we look at our graph and compare it. Hey, that looks almost identical to what we're looking for. So that means that C is the correct answer for number 16. Okay, number 17. Solve this. All right, so again, if we want to solve this one, we have to have a common denominator. And so to do that, I'm going to make 7 have an m on top and bottom, right? And so I'm going to get 7m minus 3 over m is greater than 18 over m. Okay, so I'm going to multiply both sides by m. You'll notice they cancel m out the m's. I get 7m minus 3 is greater than 18. Now this should hopefully be an easier problem for you to solve. You add 3, you get 7m is greater than 21. The m is greater than 3 by dividing by 7, which if you look right here, m greater than 3 is an option. But there's also one that says m is less than 0. Now, you'll notice that if I have something that's less than 0 right here, I'd get negatives, right? Okay, well, why don't we try something that's less than 0? Let's try negative 1. Okay, so if we put in m is negative 1, okay, this is what we get. 7 minus 3 over negative 1 is greater than 18 over negative 1, right? Well, this would be 10 because minus a negative 3 would be adding. 10 is greater than negative 18. Hey, that is true. I wonder if it works for other ones. So let's try like m is equal to negative 2. And so we get 7 minus 3 over negative 2 is greater than 18 over negative 2, which would be adding 1.5, so we get 8.5 is greater than negative 9, which is also true. So that means we also have to say that m must be less than 0. And so the correct answer for number 17 is A. Okay, number 18. Looks really scary, okay? But we said that the best way to take care of all of these problems is to factor them all out into their factors. And so we're going to do that, and I'm going to do it a little bit quickly. So first, I can factor out a 3 from 3b squared, and I get b squared minus 4, which we can actually change because we know b squared minus 4 is actually b plus 2 and b minus 2 over 6b squared plus 12b. So I'm going to take out a 6b, and I get b plus 2. Okay? Now, I see a big division. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just multiply it by its reciprocal. So I'm going to take, now this is actually going to be the top of my second fraction. And I'm going to factor out a 10b, because then I'm going to get b plus 2. And then my last one is going to be the 5b minus 10. So if I take a 5 out, I get b minus 2. Now, let's simplify as much as we can. Okay? Well, first, I see that I have a b plus 2 and a b plus 2 cancel out, and a b minus 2 and a b minus 2 cancel out. I also see that I have a b that cross cancels here. I see that 3 and 6 is actually 1 and 2. And this is actually 10 and 5 would be 2 and 1. Let's check it out. The 2 cancels to 1 and 1. And so all I'm left with is this guy right here, b plus 2. And so the correct answer to this one, through all the canceling, is going to be D, b plus 2. All right, number 19. It says, what is the least common multiple of t squared minus t minus 12 and t squared plus 2t minus 24? So I said the best thing to do is to factor them out. So t squared minus t minus 12 is going to be t minus 4 and t plus 3. The other one, t squared plus 2t minus 24, is going to factor to be t minus 4 and t plus 6. Right? Because negative 4 times 6 is going to be negative 24. And you'll notice both of them have the minus 4 in common, so we know that's going to be in it. This one has t plus 3, and this one has t plus 6. So our correct answer is going to be t plus 3, t minus 4, and t plus 6. So A is the correct answer for this one. Alrighty, last problem, number 20. It says to simplify our expression. Now you'll notice when we're simplifying, this is a subtraction problem, so we know we have to have a common denominator. Now you notice the denominators look really close. The only difference is that one is m minus 6 and the other is 6 minus m. So to get rid of the difference in their order, and we know subtraction is not commutative, what we can do is multiply the bottom here by negative 1 and negative 1, okay? And so what ends up happening is I get 7 over m minus 6, and then I get minus m over negative 1 times m minus 6. And so you'll see that this negative and this minus a negative actually becomes adding. And so I end up getting m plus 7 on top and m minus 6 on bottom. And they actually switched the order in their answer, but the correct answer then would be B, m plus 7 over m minus 6. Okay, good luck on your test. Let me know if you have any questions after watching the video. Also, remember that in Google Classroom, there is the question Google form. So if you have any questions on the test or on the review here, please write down what they are and what your confusion is, and I'll get back to you. Good luck, and we'll see you next time.